Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Couples Counseling ATL's book club. And this month, we are so excited to discuss No Bad Parts by Dick Schwartz. It was a pleasure to read, very insightful. I enjoyed it. This was, I think, personally just rewarding for me too. I learned a lot about myself, and I think I could see how lots of people would benefit from it. Joining us today are some of our therapists at Counseling ATL. We've got Liz Clements, we've got Ada De Almeida, and we've also got Mandy Lucito and our wonderful client care coordinator, Camila. And so, if everybody is ready, let's just jump into it. What do you think? Monomind, multi-mind? Are we really made of different parts and different voices that are competing with each other? Did you like that sort of theory of mind? Did you not like that? Let me know your thoughts.
It's funny. I've been starting to use some of this IFS with clients, and I had a client ask me, is this normal? Is it normal to have all these thoughts? I feel a little crazy. And I think a lot of us do tend to think of dissociative identity disorder when we think of having different parts that are in control. Also used to be referred to as multiple personality disorder for those who are not aware. But I think that this actually normalizes a lot of that. And I resonate so personally in reading this with so many different parts that kind of come forward. And in the height of stress, when I'm overwhelmed by something, I definitely see different parts at bay here. I've done some training in IFS previously, and they talked about how this originated from eating disorders. And a lot of people talk about there's a part of me that wants to do this, and there's a part of me that feels like this. And I think a lot of us can even just resonate with that kind of language alone.
Thank you for sharing, Mandy. I think a lot of us can identify with having conflicting parts within us, and that it's not always just, I feel 100% this one way, but rather, especially for harder decisions in life or times when we're emotionally conflicted, it's because we aren't 100% feeling one way. And there are multiple feelings. Thank you for sharing and for bringing up IFS or internal family systems, that this really is the author who originated that. Yes, with eating disorder work. And then it's spread like wildfire into lots of other presenting issues too. Gio, Liz, Camila, any other kind of initial thoughts or feelings about the book?
I was thinking about the exercise in the very beginning of the book that I really enjoyed about mapping your different parts. So I basically just drew a little body and try to identify, do some meditation on what are some of the parts that might be coming up for me, for example. I thought it was very helpful just to narrow that down. Just seeing it on paper too gives you that idea of, oh, I have multiple, like sometimes competing, sometimes working together parts, but it's not like this one part represents my whole identity or anything like that, right? So you might have a part that's stuck in some past traumas. You might have a part that's a little anxious or that's overly functioning or critical, for example. So I think just doing that exercise, becoming more aware of it was something that was very helpful, interesting to me. And that could be helpful with clients as well, right? For us to sit down and try to narrow what are some of those different parts that what could they be telling you?
What I really liked about this book and just IFS in general, and going off what you were saying, Geo, is, or like what stands out to me is like when it's talking about the like protective parts and how, and it's something I talk about in my sessions a lot, maybe not specifically in IFS terms, but like that concept that we develop these coping strategies and defense mechanisms throughout our life, a lot develop in childhood, and they really served us and they're not serving us now. And I just really like how this book goes into using curiosity with ourselves to better understand those protectors or those bad parts, which there is no bad part. But I think showing that curiosity and informing it, I'm okay. I'm not that person or that young child anymore. And I can protect myself, or that self comes forward. And I no longer need that type of protecting. And then lets those protectors go into a more joyful role. It sounds like poetry to me. I loved it.
That, I think you bring up a good point, Liz, too, that for who this might work well with and who this might not work as well with. If you're a lover of poetry, and the language here spoke to me as well, but I also have worked with many people who might really initially roll their eyes at some of this, like the thought of the protector part or the the exile part of me that's causing all this turmoil. It's not initially, I think, going to speak to everyone because it might feel a little too woo-woo, or there might be a preconceived notion, understandably, by some people that, oh, this sounds like multiple personality disorder, or this sounds too fragmented for someone like me. Like, I'm pretty even keel, or I don't really experience a lot of inner turmoil or warring voices, so to speak. So for some people who already have, I think, a lot of harmony in their life and don't agonize over decisions and feel like they're pretty much at peace with themselves most of the time, or maybe their childhood, like they were allowed to have all the feelings, if they did come from a pretty functional background and they don't have a lot of suppression of emotion, they might not benefit as much from a book like this, or they might not be drawn as much to a book like this. But I do think for most of us who didn't have perfectly validating parents, or if we had any dysfunction whatsoever in our history, that most likely we did have to learn some coping mechanisms that maybe don't really work now, that really may have served us at one time. So I do think that this can be insightful for majority of people who have unfortunately learned to suppress certain emotions or certain parts of themselves. Those are my 2 cents about who this book might benefit the most, is especially if there's a part of you that you work hard to not identify with. Any other thoughts about who might really be interested or benefit from this sort of book?
Yeah. You bring up a lot of really good points, Stephanie. Even thinking about when I first started my own individual therapy years and years ago, I really struggled to go into the feeling myself. So I think at that point in my life, I would have had a really hard time resonating with this kind of work. Some different things that I really enjoyed, and again, in my own individual therapy, but even professionally, I really have enjoyed some narrative kind of therapy techniques in general, and along with inner child work. I think that having so much comfortability and experience in those things, I resonate more with this. But again, people who maybe don't resonate as much with those kind of techniques, I could see having a similar difficulty with this more IFS approach. Like you said, shutting down some of those parts, or really detaching from certain aspects of yourself, like not wanting to go there. I think that Dick did a pretty good job of trying to, I don't know if anyone listened to the audiobook, but it's actually him guiding you through the exercises, which is really cool. He does a really good job of trying to be so gentle. And if you're being met with resistance, like really trying to be open to some of that, or be gentle if you're being met with any resistance around this. But I've been surprised at how many clients that I've tried using some of these techniques with that are really resonating with it. But yeah, definitely not for everyone.
I was thinking as well, when it comes to clients who may have a diagnosis of dissociative identity disorder, or even clients that may have a little bit of a tendency to dissociate, right, from any experiences. It might take a little bit of extra work to get to being able to identify some of those parts, especially since we might be used to escaping them, right? But I do think that there is a lot of power with such clients of like mapping out some of their parts and what they might be saying.
I know we've been talking more about theory and some of the exercises, but I think it would be really helpful for anyone considering this book and how it might help them to think of it more of a story, whether it's a story that Dick shared in his book, or a story of how we've used this in our own life, or a story about how we might, in theory, use this with one of our couples therapy clients or with one of our individual clients. If there's anything that jumps to mind for any of you about how internal family systems, or again, the exercises and no bad parts might really benefit someone, let me know. Otherwise, I'm happy to share a story. Mandy, Gio, Liz, anybody have an example story?
I was thinking about the Fraser's table intervention exercise. So I've actually done some of this before with previous clients, but it's a little bit of an exercise that you're using some meditation techniques, a little bit of trying to close your eyes and picture some of these parts, but it's almost like you're drawing a table and you're inviting your different parts to sit at that table so that you can observe them or have a conversation with them. So I've done it with clients before, that they would draw that table and the different parts. So they would try to identify and even see what a part might look like for them. So I've had clients before draw a boat as their core self, for example, because they felt like, yeah, I'm a little bit unstable, but sometimes I can sail through all the things that are coming my way. So seeing those like visual representations of those parts, many times as well, those parts can have bodies, right? I think that Dick talks about that in the book. But just identifying what the parts look like, trying to draw them or trying to picture them in the room, and then observing which parts are sitting together, which parts are saying what to each parts, or maybe two of those parts are fighting in that exercise. So that's particularly an exercise that I like to do. It helps you see all of those parts, what functions they're playing there. And on a further next level, you can even start having a dialogue with some of those parts, right? Asking them questions or asking them for permission to better understand where they're coming from. I don't know if anybody wants to speak on this exercise or any other ones.
No, that's a great introduction, Gio, to that. And that's a key exercise. Mandy or Liz, I'd be happy to, unless you want to, just to fill that out a little bit and share in a kind of fleshing it out way. Okay, I'll go ahead. So if we were to use that exercise, or if anybody considering using this in their own life or reading this book would use it, think about just like a typical issue many of us might struggle with. So let's say a person, it could be in a couple that we see, or it could be just an individual that we see. Let's say that they, whether it's through COVID or it's been years, they developed some problematic overconsumption, maybe alcohol, for example. And they're not necessarily identifying as an alcoholic, but they know that this drinking has gotten out of hand. Maybe it was just once a week, and then it started becoming every day after work. I'm stressed out about work and my marriage and my kids. And so, I look forward to that fill in the blank cocktail, glass of wine. And then that one turns into two every night. And before they know it, they're hungover every morning. They're barking more easily at their kids to go to bed, or they're barking at their spouse and being a little bit more irritable. And maybe every day they have a little bit of shame about it. Ugh, I wasn't going to do that again. Here I am again, though. I'm feeling crappy. I'm tired. And then I'm not going to do it. And then 5 o'clock rolls around again. I'm going to have another glass. I'll start tomorrow. And so you can see how, when we've seen this with many clients, we've seen this with both couples and individuals, that if we were to look through this lens of internal family systems, we might think of this one person being divided into all these different potential parts, right? Maybe there's the one part, we'll say maybe the exile. I don't know if you guys would give it any language, but maybe it's the problem, right? The over consumer. This is maybe the part of them that keeps coming up like whack-a-mole. They're trying to just destroy and get rid of, and they wish they could just stop it, right? In a very black and white way. I'm just going to stop drinking and it's going to be done. But if we look through the IFS lens, maybe the part that's drinking is, we're just going to look with compassion. We're going to invite them to the little table, like Gio said, and we don't necessarily have to come up with a name, but maybe we'd ask our client, what do they look like? What are they wearing? How do they talk? And for example, again, this is not a real case. I'm just completely making this up. You might say, oh, this is the stressed out, just burnout, crispy shell of a person who just wants a little fun in their life, right? This person is, I used to be fun, and now I'm just a worker bee, or I'm just a parent, or I'm just there. Maybe this part of this person that they're just kind of ashamed. I just want the easy thing. I just want to turn off life. I just want to enjoy something. I don't want to go work out. I don't want to call a friend. I don't want to do meditation. I don't want to do all these things that my therapist keeps suggesting. I just want to relax and I want to drink. So maybe they give them that sort of intonation, like it's like obstinate sounding, and it's maybe there's eye rolling, like, just shut up already about all the healthy things I could do. I just want to drink, right? Maybe that's the part. And then you say, okay, what other parts are there? And then maybe there's the critical part, right? That's just like the next day part of themselves. That's just, why did I do this again? I'm hungover. I'm tired. I'm snapping at my kids. I'm snapping at my spouse. I'm not getting stuff done at work. And that's maybe the self-flagellating critic, who also is maybe across the table, really beady-eyed, looking at the other part. It's just like, how could you do this again? You fill in the blank. Maybe it's some expletive, or maybe it's a horrible name Maybe it's something that they heard in childhood whenever they would mess up. Maybe it's the voice of a more critical part of their parents. And then Geo, Mandy, Liz, you got any other parts? We might fill this table with a person struggling with this all too common substance abuse.
Something I just want to say before I answer that, you're like painting such a clear picture of the different types of protectors that we see. A lot of times we'll see one kind of protector is the firefighter that reacts when we are flooded. So like a drinking behavior, that is like very classic firefighter. Other things like overspending, overeating, even like binging anything or self-harm or any of those kind of like more maladaptive behaviors. You're like painting such a good picture of that. And also such a good picture of the other side of it, more of the managers. Those are also protectors in our systems, if you will. But with managers, these are going to be parts that are more proactive. So that kind of the critical part of them is like trying to police, trying to keep things in line, like, running some of the day-to-day stuff. And you can just hear so much how they're in conflict. The other thing that I don't know that comes to mind, I think a lot of times we see like a selfishness, I think, come through with some of this. So you could even see how like the critical part, and then if it's someone who is maybe a little more selfish, like that could be technically another part, or like obsessing over even the alcohol, like that could be another part. I could see so many different parts coming through to answer your question.
I was picturing too, like maybe a loving parent part, right? So a part that's very caring about the kids, that's thinking about what do they need for their development. Ooh, when I'm drinking, this is what's happening. This is not the type of behavior I don't want to snap at the kids. Or maybe even like a researcher part that has read all of these books on like how to be a good parent, and then it's conflicting with the critical part, right? Like I have all of this information, but I'm still caving to this other part, and then there's some degree of dissonance there. But I was picturing a little bit of a lovey-dovey, like kind of parent part that is just like crazy about the kids.
Very good. And there could be, again, a couple, we're just brainstorming, but potentially there could be all kinds of other parts just coming to mind. If I were to do rapid fire, there could be a part that is a minimizer. That's just like, come on, this is a tough phase of life. What's the big deal? Everybody's having a little bit more drinking during this time. You're not out fill in the blank doing something worse, right? You haven't gone out for cigarettes and never come back. The Bruce Springsteen song. You haven't abandoned your family. You haven't hit your kid or done something way worse in their mind, right? Maybe they're thinking about drinking in front of your kids or snapping is not as bad as fill in the blank, or what they might think of as a worse behavior. Or maybe there's a more vulnerable part as you do some work that starts to present itself that's like a little sad, like maybe anger is a little bit easier for them. So the angry part steps in and is a bigger part. But then as we explore, maybe there's some sadness about, I didn't think my life would be like this right now. Or I thought I would be better at this. Or I thought this would come more naturally to me. Or there's some grief and loss. Like I thought I'd have more of a village. I thought I'd have more help at this season of my life. Or I thought my marriage would be better. Like there could be all kinds of maybe sad parts that start to appear. And then Dick also talks more about the self, like the capital S self part of all of us that is more permanent, that really isn't as fluctuating, that is wise, that is compassionate, that is the true essential part of all of us that can't be changed. And so obviously we would help a client to get in touch with that part of themselves too, that's more of like the observer, that's always there, that's inviting everyone to the table to talk. And so that self may not be as visible, especially when clients start therapy or when they start reading a book like this. But that's part of, I think, the hope of a book like this, and the hope of most therapists using IFS, is to help bring the self front and center so that clients can really look at all of these parts of themselves with more compassion, less shame. And again, just like the title of the book, to not see the parts as bad or good, but to think of them, in a more value neutral way that is just so that they can get to know them and work with them for anything that might be problematic rather than judging. Because we know from most research that judgment is a great way to just recreate really awful cycles all the time. If you want to keep doing things that hurt you or others, just keep judging yourself and stay in a place of shame, right? That's a great way to stay stuck. So this is all about bringing it to light, reducing shame, increasing more compassion,
Mhm.
Some of the mechanisms, you guys can maybe talk about this, but some of the mechanisms of change, I believe, that they theorize with IFS is that by inviting them all to the table compassionately and helping them to look at themselves more compassionately, that there's not as much judgment, there is less shame. And through that, there is the ability to then change or to grow or to evolve. Anything you
Yeah.
want to add?
I said, Stephanie, I wanted to share the 8 C's of self: curiosity, calm, clarity, connectedness, confidence, courage, creativity, and compassion. And you hit on so many of those. I just wanted to share for everybody that those are the qualities that make up our true self, essentially. And I think that when I've shared that with clients, that it's been helpful for them to parse apart, when is this one of my parts or one of my protectors coming forward? And when is this actually me? When is this my true self? And I'm so glad that you hit on shame. I have seen this even for myself, but for the clients that I work with, that this is like a shame destroyer to do this kind of work in the best way possible. I do think that shame is like one of the most chronic like things that we can really deal with. And it can be so hard to overcome shame. And yet when these parts come forward, even when we are disgusted by them, even when we're like, this is not something I'm proud of, trying to take some of that curiosity that is a part of our true self to be like, what is this trying to tell me? It is trying to protect something, but what is this trying to tell me? Oftentimes, and I tell clients this all the time, oftentimes that's trying to tell you that there's a need that's not met, or that there's a boundary that we need to have in place. I've done some of this IFS work personally. And when I first did this, one of the first exercises, that's what it was trying to tell me. Okay, you got this, Mandy. I'll take the back seat. You got the reins. I trust you. But as soon as this happens, you come find me. We're gonna leave this conflict if you're being treated X, Y, and Z. So I really resonate so much with how we can be curious with these parts, not so ashamed of them, but also listening to what they have to say. What do I need to act on? What are you trying to tell me, essentially?
Thank you for sharing personally too, Mandy. I really appreciate your modeling vulnerability and sharing with us and with other people just how powerful this work can be. Just to add what you said, I loved everything that you said, especially your personal experience, but in the C's that you mentioned. The one thing Dick mentioned, not just about the C's of the self and eradicating shame, but part of the work that he's suggesting that we all can do is to reparent our inner children and to create internal harmony and working on our inside so that we can then go out to the world with more calm and all those things that we hope to have with ourselves. So by sitting in the and learning almost desensitization, like learning how to sit with the discomfort of the shame. Oh my gosh, I said that to my kid. Oh my gosh, I did that again. But just allowing yourself to sit with the shame, but not in a self-flagellating way, but in a more just compassionate, observing way, that you can stop the firefighters that are trying to quickly just get us out of that. The firefighters are not about fixing the whole situation. They're about just pushing the panic button and helping us survive, but not necessarily helping us grow. I love the whole idea of reparenting our inner child, which again, language-wise, just like poetry, may not appeal to everyone, but almost all of us have negative memories and have had bad things happen to us, especially as children, that have affected us and who we've become. And so by revisiting that, by going back to maybe why this part has become such a part of us, we can start to see that also how it's connected to our childhood, where it came from, why it exists, why it's so strong, why it's a knee-jerk reaction for us when we're in certain situations. And so that obviously gaining more and more insight is one of the steps. It's not the only step, but it seems like what he's really sharing too is not just about becoming more knowledgeable and insightful, but literally, just like when he's guiding you through the exercises, letting yourself feel. This is not just an intellectual exercise. I think it's meant to be a highly emotional exercise for most people and a cathartic one. So that might be a little bit more challenging for those of us. I'm not saying I struggle with this, but who like to stay in a more intellectual space and who don't necessarily want to feel the feelings. So if we have anybody who struggles more with feeling the feelings, this is going to be a little bit more of a challenge, but probably also really good for you. Thoughts?
So I can't remember if the book tied this into like couples. So forgive me if this is not an original idea, but like I can't help obviously tying it to could this be useful for couples, and of exactly what you just said. As long as I think if both couples are in tune with their emotions and want to dive into that, if they're both doing that type of work and getting in touch with themselves, I think it can really build that compassion between the two of them, and using that curiosity to see where our partner's triggers are coming from, and could also help us combat that negative sentiment overdrive and go more towards that positive sentiment. So where we're not internalizing, this is about me, it's okay, there's something going on with them. Let me use that curiosity to have a better understanding. Going through that together in a way, I think could be awesome. I haven't done it with any couple, but like I think it could be, yeah. So it could be really, anyway.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Liz. I think that's a really good point. And a lot of the books that we read that might benefit people individually, I think can also usually be applied in a great way to couples. I think of it more also as there's brown belt level, like learning how to do this in karate, like just myself. But really, it's a black belt level skill for a lot of couples to then learn how to do this with someone else. I think that is part of good couples therapy. That is probably what you do a lot, Liz, is helping couples to do this together. But I know that it's hard enough for many people to do this for themselves. And sometimes that's why couples therapy really can be helpful, is to have a mediator, to have a guide, to have a compassionate person like yourself to help them to learn how to do this. Because with couples, we see this a lot too, where their firefighters are both online, like in the room. And the hypercritical part who will not allow, again, fill in the blank, whatever vulnerable feeling. And then another person's firefighter, which also might be critical or might be destructive in some way, coming online. And we see couples, like several different parts coming, I think, out in the room all the time. So I agree with you. I think this could really apply well to couples therapy. I haven't done it yet, but I think it certainly could. Any other kind of insights? Anything you didn't like about the book, or anything that you feel like would be anything that you wish he had gone into or explained further? I think to sum up and to wrap it up, and it's a great book. We're not doing it service to only talk this length of time, but I do think that it's rich. I think it could be for a lot of people. Majority of people, I think, could benefit from this. The people that might struggle would be, again, people who are a little bit more stuck in their head intellectually and have a hard time getting into their bodies or getting into their emotions, but it would still be good for them. Recap, we're all made of these parts, according to Dick Schwartz, and sometimes they are contradictory or they seem mutually exclusive, but he's arguing they're not, and that all of us have different voices and parts of us that are sometimes at war, but they don't have to be. They can be in harmony. And he's also arguing that there aren't bad parts, even parts of us that have done horrible things. He likes to say that he's worked with people who have done what majority of people would consider horrible things. But he likes to look at those parts of them as there for a reason and something to teach us about ourselves. And that we all possess this core self that isn't the parts, but it is the essence of us. All the different C's that Mandy mentioned, compassion and just a lot of the good stuff that we all strive character-wise to be. And then in order to heal, though, if we have patterns that keep repeating or things that are painful or dysfunctional that keep happening, in order to heal that, we have to reparent our inner children, these parts of ourselves that have developed because of our environment, because of the way we grew up. And so we have to get to know them all compassionately, invite them to the table, talk to them, have them talk to each other. And when we're able to do this, we have more harmony, we have more peace, we have more calm, we have more self-compassion. And then hopefully, again, couples therapy, we have more compassion for other people, because we're seeing maybe this is a part of them that's coming at us, rather than seeing them as being completely defined by one bad behavior, right? And then finally, he really suggests, we didn't get into this, but lots of different practical ways to stay connected to yourself, to work with your parts on an ongoing basis so that you can continue to evolve and have self-compassion and compassion for other people. And we all liked it. It seems I did struggle to finish it, and not because it was a bad book, but I think because it does make you self-reflect. And even though I'm a therapist, I don't always want to self-reflect. And so I had to keep putting it down because I was like, I don't know if I want to think about that part. I've done my therapy, but all of us are works in progress. And I think it's a really great book. I think most of us would benefit from doing more of this sort of work. Mandy, thank you for introducing us to this book and to this work. I know that you're such a big fan. You've done some great training in IFS. Thank you. I know you do great IFS work, and I'm so excited to see what you and Liz and Gio and our other therapists might do with IFS with couples. And so maybe eventually we can have a follow-up discussion about using IFS with couples. I think that would be fascinating. But thank you. Thank you so much. And I hope everyone has a great day.